So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is XPRIZE in case you guys are not familiar with it. I'm going to talk about the specific competition. I have a very short history on the Star Trek Tricorder, which you all can feel free to fill in any gaps if you know more. And then I'll talk about my involvement in the competition and what I did for them. And this was all about a year ago. And I'll just, a quick aside, I was on, probably about a year ago, I was on LinkedIn and I believe it's the user experience, there's a user experience group on LinkedIn, and there was a call for people to help with the XPRIZE because this was one of the first prizes that was geared towards consumers. And that's an important distinction versus patient, and we'll get to that a little bit later. And what they really wanted was, they wanted people to conduct a series of UX webinars during the summer that kind of educated the teams on UX. And so I submitted my name, and within 10 minutes I had a call from Jessica Ching, who was helping run the program, the competition. And she had never heard of a company that was specific to user experience and usability in healthcare software. And so I told her about our company and what we did, and she just loved the concept. And I told her that we conduct a UX bootcamp or a UX workshop, which some of you have been to. And so basically what she wanted to do was have me advise the teams and also conduct what was usually an 8-hour workshop and condense it down into a 3-hour boot camp, which was very interesting and a bit harried. So let's talk a little bit about the XPRIZE Foundation. So XPRIZE was founded on looking at problems where no capital is being spent, or there's not a desired result. Maybe the capital is being spent, but there's no desired result. Nobody knows it's a problem, or the problem is known, but no one can imagine how to address that problem. And they really wanted to be able to push the boundaries of human potential by focusing on problems that are currently believed to be unsolvable. There's no clear path, right? And I don't know, some of you might remember, I think it was, I want to say it was 96. The Ansari was the first XPRIZE, putting someone into space for orbit, right? And so since then, they've obviously expanded into lots of different areas. Exploration, the Ansari is right there. Global development, there's a lot of developing nation competitions for education or bringing water to remote areas. Energy and environment, learning, and life sciences, which is where this competition I was involved in fell. So this particular prize is $10 million. It will be awarded in January of next year. At the point I got involved, they were getting ready to narrow down 30+ teams to a top 10. Now there didn't have to be 10, but they could have been less, but they ended up awarding 10 teams to the final round. And the goal of this competition, and I really like this, the de-skilling of medicine. And that's kind of where my passion lies in healthcare, and that is, it's been such a black box for so long in so many realms that if we can, and we're already seeing this, right, with mobile technology, if we can do something from our home and have it be accurate and have it translate back into the medical community as something that they feel like they can rely on, and it's not kind of us going in and going, I've been reading on WebMD and all these crazy sites about this condition I've diagnosed myself with, right? That there's going to be more of a partnership, and it has to open up to us. We have to understand as consumers and patients our health and what everything from going in and how much it's going to cost me for this visit to what it is that I'm being diagnosed with and the action that I can take, really empowering the consumer. The other bullets are what the solution had to do. So it has to assess 16 distinct conditions. There were 13 required, and I'm not sure I can pronounce all these, but some of them are things like anemia, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, diabetes, hepatitis A, pneumonia, ear infections, sleep apnea, stroke, tuberculosis, urinary tract infection, and then the absence of condition, right? And then there were 3 elected conditions they could choose from: allergens, cholesterol screening, foodborne illness, HIV screening, hypertension, and things along those lines. It also had to continuously monitor our 5 vitals and send it to the cloud. and logging data to the cloud, and so it could pull back and forth. And this was the first, my understanding is this is the first XPRIZE that was actually launched that was geared toward consumers, and therefore 50% of their final score is around user experience and the usability of the solution. And that's the first time that's ever been a requirement of the final solution, or the final, the winning solution for an XPRIZE competition. And then it had to be mobile, so it had to be less than 5 pounds. So those were the kind of the minimum requirements. And it's interesting as if you had gone back and looked at read through all the requirements of the website and the diseases and stuff about a year ago, it has changed drastically. It's a very organic competition that has to kind of change as the solutions start to evolve. They see what the teams kind of run into, and then they kind of have to make, they have to adjust to what they're running into and the issues that they're having. So some of this may have changed since now. So the point at which I got involved was the qualifying round completed. They had to have a controlled demonstration of system performance. Now, it didn't have to be a prototype, but they had to be able to prove that they had a viable solution. If they had prototypes, great. If they just had a lot of technical documentation around how this would work, that was acceptable also. So evaluation of supporting studies, multimedia prototypes. There had to be some type of user interface that was going that the end users would be able to interact with. And then up to 10 finalist teams selected from the over 30. And the interesting thing that I learned, and when I got out there, this is in San Diego, was that once they announced the top 10 teams, all of the rest of the teams that weren't selected, they could offer themselves up as a merger. And then also those top 10 teams could turn around and go, okay, well, look, now that you're disqualified, let me see your solution, and maybe we can fold you guys in to our team. So there's a lot of, it's nice to be able to do, they could acquire each other or reorganize, share technical assets and that kind of thing. So I thought that was kind of a neat aspect of the widening the brain share there. This was the consumer experience evaluation. So this is what, let me tell you what's going on right now. So as of May 1, which is next Friday, right? God, I can't believe it's already May. The 10 teams have to have 30 working devices. And they have to take those devices out to these consumers that are going to be selected, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And they have 72 hours, the consumers have 72 hours to take that device home and then use it and then match it against this criteria. So, and I'll show this a little bit easier, to read later, but they are essentially appeal, do I like the way it looks and feels, that's 10 points, so this is for a total of 100. Functionality, do I like the way it works? That's 33 points. Understandability, can I understand the information and is it provided in a way I like? 33 points. And then action, does it have information that makes me feel or act positively? And that's 24 points. So it's interesting the way those are weighted around functionality and understandability. I think appropriately the heavier weights. Actions, does the fact that I'm going through the trouble of using this make me want to change? Do I see a behavioral change in myself? So it's sort of a psychosocial aspect there, and that's the second kind of heavy weight, 24 points. And then appeal is the last, so I think that's interesting. Okay, yeah, here's where I go. Appeal. Yeah, there's lots of, and then they can rank these like 1 point, 1.5, and that kind of thing to add up to the total points. Okay, so this is where you guys got to help me out if you know more than I do, right? The Star Trek Tricorder, abbreviation Tricorders for Tri-Functioning Recorder. And in the Star Trek series, there were 3 tricorders. There was the sensing tricorder, there was the computing tricorder, and there was the recording tricorder. I'm sorry, that's not the 3 corders. That's the primary tricorder. The 3 variants on the Star Trek episode are these. There was the standard where you saw them out when they landed on a foreign planet and they're kind of scouting around looking at the atmosphere and the plants and the vegetation and that kind of thing. There was the engineering. Who's the guy that was always fixing the Enterprise? Scotty. We probably used that one a lot, trying to figure out and diagnose what was going on with the. And then there was the medical. And the medical, obviously used by physicians. It would diagnose diseases. It would collect bodily information about a patient. You know, I remember them scanning, using the tricorder to scan the patient on the table. And then there's onboard storage of a detachable handheld. I don't know if you remember seeing the little tiny round cylinder thing that they would either do on the forehead or kind of scan the body. The sensor probe. And then it was in the actual show, they just took a salt shaker and kind of wrapped it with some duct tape, and that's what they used for it. The original tricorder in use by the wrong person here. I mean, I'm sure, you know, Spock was a doctor, but Bones is the one on the table, right? I know, see, it's Bones is laying down on the job, literally. So this is the early version. Another version. You guys jump in here if you know what versions these are. This is the next gen's Mark XTR 590. It looks like the early flip phones of the mid-90s. And then it kind of graduated to the Voyager's Mark XSL TR 990, where it's still kind of a flip phone, but we now have that flip-up antenna kind of thing. That might be the sensor. And then we have the, I guess, maybe the most recent one. I'm not sure. It looks most like the kind of the PDAs of the 2000s, I guess. Any questions so far? Did it do well on the history, Star Trek? I tried, it's really hard.
Well, close enough.
Yeah.
For this crowd, yeah.
I mean,
DragonCon, no.
Yeah, exactly. I would have been just brutalized. My husband is a triple grad of Georgia Tech. He's an engineer, so I was like, you know, you told me all about the Furbies. Tell me if I'm doing this okay. All right, top finalist teams. These are the top finalist teams. And I went out to San Diego for once the top 10 teams were announced, they had a summit to review all the rules and talk about any merging they might be doing. It was in San Diego because one of the University of California, San Diego, their medical department is supplying all the users, the consumers that will be testing. And so they were going to tour those facilities. So I was out there to do two things. One, to meet with the teams one-on-one. And two, to conduct that UX boot camp. And these are the actual teams I had the opportunity to meet with.
How many entrants were there?
There were probably around 100 originally, and then it dropped off very quickly within a couple months to I think it was like 36, that they narrowed it down to the 10. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Scanadu, but they're a very elite, high-profile, Xerox PARC-based company that has done a lot of work here, and so they did not show. I'm sure they've got it all under control. You guys can do like a YouTube search and see all the work they're doing. It's really interesting. And Zensor is out of Ireland, and so they ended up coming to the boot camp in the afternoon. So either they were there and you know, had some jet lag, or they didn't get there in time. So, but I met with everybody else. And so what I'm going to do next is kind of take you through each of the teams, talk about who they are and what they showed me if they could, or how they described their solutions. So feel free to stop me at any time to ask any questions you might have. The first team, Mezi, was out of Slovenia, and I met with their CEO, Jakob Šušterič. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I should say most of these companies, most of these teams are already medical-based companies. They have devices or they provide software. There was a team of students from Johns Hopkins University, and they were, to me, one of the most impressive, and we'll get to them. And then I'll tell you who I have my bets on for winning. So Mezi had this device on the market, right? It's their portable device called the ankle brachial index measuring device. So they're kind of already in the field. And what their solution is relies heavily on this medical grade wristband, which is a lot like a Fitbit. So that's taking care of all the vitals, most of the vitals and that kind of thing. heart rate, temperature, blood oxygenation. And then it also monitors activity. It has medication reminders via the app, as you can see on the Android phone. And then these two round devices, one is a stethoscope and one is a camera. And granted, these are all just prototypes right now, so I'm sure they look very different in actual implementation.
You can't buy off the shelf right now.
No, not on this one. Now there's some others ones that we'll get to that are already on the shelf.
Advanced for Slovenia.
Oh yeah, probably. The other two on the end are color-coded for the blood and urinalysis. So these are just collection devices, and at the time he wasn't sure, how they were going to use. They've got the collection device, but how are they going to test the fluids to then inform the disease? So that's where they were. He was really down on the bracelet, I guess, because it was just kind of a saturated market with the kind of the Fitbit and all the wearables. So he was talking to me about they were now designing this piece of material that was embedded with sensors that you could pull up and wear under your clothing. It went up on the arm, so it was a sleeve, and then wrapped around the chest here. And that would take the place, for the most part, of the wristband. And it was obviously a very new concept, and they were really still ideating around it, because I was talking about, well, if that's going to be on your shoulder, you're going to have to think about different sizes of arms and people's different muscular structure. As a woman who carries a purse, I'm always throwing that stuff on my shoulder, and what is that going to do? How are you going to deal with body sweat and heat and that kind of thing? So I was just trying to help him troubleshoot if that was a good idea at this point. So this was September last year, and by February, March of this year, they had to have 2 functioning prototypes. So this means they've had to go on through manufacturing and have 2 devices that actually worked. And with only a month or 2 later to have 30 functioning, right? For the consumers to test.
Have you talked to them? Do they have that?
I have not talked to them yet. Yeah, no.
He wasn't trying to do any chemistry.
Not so much here, at least at this point. Now there are others you'll see that are into the DNA testing and that kind of thing. So.
I understand Microsoft's trying to do chemistry in their band.
Oh, they really? Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's everybody's. I feel like, of course, I'm totally immersed in this, but it's like everybody's getting into it. This was Basil Leaf. I met with Philip Charan, their UX guy. This was their device, and they were the only one, and actually they were the only ones that had a prototype that I could use. I'd asked all the teams to bring whatever I could interact with to provide feedback, and this was the only one with an actual kind of prototype. And they set it down on the table, and I immediately picked it up. And it was very intuitive to pick up, and your middle finger wraps across that top part, and you rest your hand and fingers wrap around that indention on either side. And then on the bottom is a stethoscope and a camera, so that you could hold it to your chest or take a picture of yourself and that kind of thing. They called it Dexter, handheld device, vitals, and camera. And then they had an iPad application that you could start answering questions to kind of self-diagnose. And so they were very concerned about the iPad application and making sure that the user didn't feel like they were on an endless quest of answering questions in order to get a diagnosis. And I'll show you one of the applications that another team is using to do that. But it's a nice complement to a solution like this, because that's an interaction we're used to. We don't have to learn something new. Getting on the internet, answering some questions, and getting some feedback that way. So they were still working through that prototype, but I thought it was a nice portion of the solution, not the full solution, but a nice portion of it. This is our health. I met with Eugene. He only had pictures. And what this device does is the top flips up and houses some of the testing and where you'd put the test strips from the body fluids, and where you could input. Actually, there's an iPad stand. You flip it up, you sit your iPad in it. And there's a drawer for keeping all the test strips. And he was in the midst of ideating too. They weren't happy with this. This is what got them into the top 10 teams, but they were still trying to figure out what they were going to do with it. Looks very slick. I couldn't, you know, if an iPad sits on it, I'm assuming it's the regular size iPad, it feels kind of big. And I'm not sure how they're going to do the continuous monitoring of the vitals. So everybody had their own take on different aspects of this for sure. Yeah, case with 2 compartments on the top that open, the lids create an iPad stand, door on the left. And there's actually a testing area, yeah, testing area for strips. So it was, when they didn't have something, when they had a picture like this, it was very difficult to kind of talk to them about what it was and what's actually underneath there and if it's going to be actual.
Do you think teams like this were trying to be secretive? Or?
That was very interesting because I was very aware that we're in a room a little bit smaller than this and the door was at one end, so I sat us way over here because I figured, you know, we're talking about the competition and what's going to help them win. But they seemed undeterred by other people coming in and showing me stuff. I mean, if they had their stuff, they had it all laid out, and it was all very visible. So,
but like this team only wrote a picture. So
yeah, and
they either really aren't very far down the road, or they they don't want to really reveal much.
Yeah, and this is all they really had to have. And of course, they had to have supporting documentation and some research behind it, but they didn't have to have a device at this point. So yeah. This is the person that I don't know what he's going to do. As of September last year, he had nothing.
How did he make it in the
I didn't know, and I kept asking him that, and he said, well, and what he kept referring to is that I'm a worldwide consultant in this pharma and biomedical technological services, and so I'm pulling together all of these people, and they're all ideating right now. And I was like, okay, well, you must have had something. And I don't know if maybe he was being secretive, but it was a very short meeting. I tried to get him to describe what he was doing, and he just kept saying, "Oh, I've got teams working on stuff." And but I was worried for him, but he seemed to be okay. So
how are they getting in? How are they getting into these competitions if they're being so secretive about what they're actually doing with it?
So at this point in the competition, all they've had to submit is a description of the solution, some pictures like we saw in the last one, and then data and supporting technologies around the solution they were describing. So there's a lot of research at this point.
So he submitted stuff you didn't see.
Right, exactly, yeah.
You were there as a design consultant.
I was there to try and give them feedback on their design and their prototypes at this point, yeah. I met with Mr. Fusheng, and his device came in a box, and it probably had 12 different parts that you picked up and you twisted on the camera, and you twist off the camera, you put on the stethoscope, and you twist off the stethoscope, put on the otoscope. It was a good idea, except that there were so many parts, and he just had everything in a box. And so if I'm using that, I'm thinking, do I have all my parts? I haven't lost them. Are they all here because I'm about to leave on a trip, kind of thing. And he was also telling me that the boss does not like this solution. And you know, with the others that were kind of what I felt like was behind and having to have something by February, March to show, it might be a little late to start reconcepting around what they might be doing. But it felt good. I remember it was kind of you remember when everything from Apple was that slick white? That's what it looked like. It was all it felt good to turn, you know, just put the pieces on and lock them into place and use them, and just the interaction with the device felt very solid, and I was telling him, I was like, this feels good. I trust it inherently because it feels good. It wasn't actually functioning, but from that aspect, you know, it was a good sell point, I guess.
Part of the question around the secrecy and so forth is that some of them were just kind of fishing in the sense.
That's exactly.
If they get a little bit of positive feedback, they were going to not invest the rest of the money to chase the team.
Right. I think so. Especially the man that was just the worldwide negotiator and.
Well, you can't trust consultants.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Spoken by a former consultant.
Yeah, he's a good talker, right?
You ask him what time it is, he'll ask for it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, the team from India, Dhanvantri. their solution was about, this aspect of their solution was about to hit the market in India. And they were very, very excited about it, very proud of it. This is a blood pressure cuff, a pulse and pulse ox and heart rate, and this was a otoscope. And they also had a device that you could take your temperature with. So it was all around the vitals. And then they had a prototype of a plastic box with some sort of cartridge you could stick in it. It reminded me of a larger version of the Q. Are you guys familiar with the Q? It's a little tiny box that tests for testosterone and muscle inflammation. That's kind of, it's supposed to be a social, you sit it out on your desk and take your vitals and stuff. we're gonna talk about socialized medicine. Here we go, literally. And so what you could do is you could hook up each one of these devices to this guy, which was a Bluetooth to the device on the phone. And it worked. They had it functioning. They took my vitals and they could send me emails. I could see on there on the application that I was registering my temperature and blood pressure, and then they could email it to me, and so they sent that to me. The issue, at least with this portion of it, was that it came in a, the box with a big plastic, like you'd buy it off the shelf, but then there was nothing to put it in. And every single one of these 1, 2, 3 items, there was 3 items, had this rubber tubing that didn't fold. And so I'm talking, we're talking maybe what felt like 3 feet of rubber tubing for me to have to fold up with each of these devices and then stick into something. It was very unwieldy. And I tried to give them that advice, but they didn't really want to hear it because they were so excited about it hitting the market. And then I'm thinking, well, if this is hitting the market, they'll learn one way or another when they hopefully start to gather feedback, right?
What's the rubber tubing for?
Well, I guess it was just to hook it up to this guy. Because this is the one that's actually doing the measuring and then sending the data to the application on the mobile phone.
Well, you think about like a thing in a hospital that takes your blood pressure, it's got a big rubber tube that goes back to the box.
That's for air.
That's for air. But this blood pressure cuff is the same air.
Well, I can understand it on the blood pressure cuff,
but not for the others.
Yeah, I guess it's just.
Maybe one wouldn't match.
Yeah, for some reason that's how they were sending it to this device, Bluetooth. With the not LTE, but.
I don't get it. I mean, why couldn't Bluetooth be, never mind.
I know. You would think it would be embedded in those things, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is, have you ever tried to put a blood pressure cuff on yourself?
It's not easy.
No. And it's a little bit easier with the old ones where they got the Velcro, right? Because you can at least put your chin on there. This was so tightly wound, I couldn't get it on. I just sat there struggling with it. And they weren't helping me. I kept struggling with it. I couldn't get it to unfold and get it around. It kept folding back on itself. And then finally I said, could you help me with this? They put it on my arm for me. So that's obviously an issue with this type of, with that type of self-folding cuff there. It's really stiff. I think this is the last 2 teams, and I go into a little bit more detail on these last 2 teams. This is where I'm putting my money, okay? Johns Hopkins University, team of students, and I say, they just seem so young. But they have a lot at their disposal, right? And I think this is a brilliant way to go about.
We have a professor here interested in this thing.
Oh yeah? Yeah. This is a brilliant way to go about this. Go out there and see what's already being done and partner with those people, right? William from Johns Hopkins University. You guys could do this too, Georgia Tech. So I'm going to take you through the components of their solution, right? This is the AGLI, the ARC. AGLI's the ARC. Continuous non-invasive, providing ECG, heart rate, respiratory rate, blood ox, core body temperature. And if you'll see here on the back, those are earbuds that you can pull out and put in your ears and listen to music. Bluetooth streaming music. So Granny right here, she didn't have her earbuds in, but so you just wear that around your neck, and it's just passive, right? Passive data.
And they're raising money on Kickstarter.
Are they? Are they right now? Good, good. Indiegogo, yeah. This next portion, they partnered with a company called Biomedical. It's a smartphone-based DNA detection platform. It is a real-time PCR thermocycler. Right? You guys familiar with all this?
Wow.
PCR is a polymerase chain reaction, and what this does is it's a technology that's used to amplify a single copy or a few copies of DNA across several orders of magnitude that generates thousands of millions of copies of a particular DNA sequence. That then relies on thermocycling, the alternating of heating and cooling, and that allows for cloning, sequencing, screening, and diagnosis. So that's as much as I could tell you is what I just read. So manipulating DNA in order to diagnose, provide early diagnosis of malignant tumors, malignant diseases, such as leukemia, lymphomas, and this is already supposedly highly used in the cancer research field. It also does a lot of viral DNA load. So when we talk about viral loads in a patient, it's how much of the virus is in their system, which is an indicator of where they are in the course of the illness, the viral illness. And so it can do that. It can detect early detection for things like flu and any kind of viral disease, which I guess is also HIV would fall into that realm. So this is sort of their disease diagnosis piece of it, right?
But it seems to be very restrictive against 13 or 16 if you do the 3 elective conditions.
Right, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's a lot of, there's probably some wiggle room there when because the track that at least these guys are taking, right, is like what's already out there. It may not get all of those 13 diseases, but what does it get? And then then they've got another device here that covers some other things.
I'm confused. Is this part of the one on the previous slide? Or
Yes, so this is all the Johns Hopkins team. So
how does this relate to the necklace thing?
well, this is the device that they're using to gather all the vitals, right?
Okay.
And this is what they're doing to do some of the using to do some of the diagnostic, the disease diagnostic.
All come together in one place?
At this point, they had not.
So they've really got separate.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And that was my feedback to them, is that this is fantastic. In fact, I didn't say this to them, but to me, they had the most holistic and approach to the heart of the competition of trying to diagnose all of these things as well as just the simple. I mean, we already do the vitals monitoring. That's a very simple aspect of the competition. It's the disease diagnosing and that kind of thing. That's probably, to me, is the most challenging. And in this particular case, this polymerase, PCR, is going to diagnose some things but not others. And so they've got another device here that I'll show you. So far we've got the neck brace, the necklace, essentially, this biomeme for the DNA testing for diagnostic diseases. They're also working with SpiroSmart. And this is a mobile phone-based platform that allows for the analysis of common lung function. So we can look at asthma, COPD, cystic fibrosis. What this does is allow you to, there's a spirometer that you can breathe into. Well, I don't know if you've seen this now, not necessarily SpiroSmart, but there's also a spirometer you can hook right into a mobile phone and blow into. That they use, I've seen them use like in remote developing, hey, Beth. Remote countries where physicians are out in the field diagnosing this kind of thing. And it says home spirometry is gaining acceptance in the medical community because of its ability to detect pulmonary exacerbations and improve outcomes for lung patients. They also are using SimCat. And I had looked at, I've used things like the ShareCare app. And I think Doctor on Demand does a little bit of this, where you can enter your symptom and it can start to diagnose for you. This one I thought was, I had not seen this until they had shown it to me. Oh, am I going to be able to get online here?
Not quickly.
Not quickly, okay. Well, I'll just show you what it does. I'll just talk to what it does. Will I be able to send a copy of this presentation?
Yeah.
because that's linked, and you guys could go out and look at it. It's really nicely done, the website. You start to type in a symptom. What'd you say?
This is Azon's website? Or?
No, this is a company called SimCat. So it's a symptom categorizer. You start to put in your symptom, and then it will start to feed you more questions. But over on the right, it starts a percentage-based guess at what your issue is. So you can start to see those things as you put in your symptoms. It'll start to flip those around as to what it thinks you have. And it's very intuitive and just one of the best implementations, I think, for symptom and kind of self-diagnosing, versus going to something like WebMD and scaring yourself to death about what you have. Okay, so those were 3 or 4 things that they're doing. Here's their homegrown. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
How do you feel that this system doesn't step into the death? It's doing the same thing, right? You have a fever, it could be anything from.
Right.
So how does this stop skin?
That's a good question, and I'm going to answer from my personal perspective. I felt like it was just me. It wasn't so general. It was me putting in the symptoms, and then I would say, oh wait, yeah, I have that symptom too. It also suggested additional symptoms that you might be having. Yeah, this thing knows me. Confidence. I have confidence in it. I have a lot more confidence. That was my experience with it. I think it depends where you are on the spectrum of worried well to hypochondria kind of thing. But depending on what you have, I kind of move along that spectrum. And I'll show you guys who we were targeting, who the users they were targeting for the testing of these things.
I was going to say, if they're acting like a system integrator with all these different
right. Yeah, exactly.
If you're sitting there and you've got reliable vitals, and you might have even the DNA, as you inform SimCat,
right.
it really does look personal because you're taking.
Oh yeah, because it's your data, right? Yeah, exactly.
SimCat. I wonder if SimCat is set up to deal with genomic data.
Yeah, it doesn't.
That's something most people would have.
Right.
I don't get it. So they're planning to bring all this together somehow?
Somehow, yeah. And that was my feedback to them. So their last, and again, this is a rendering. They didn't really have this, but this was where you could take the urine, saliva, and what is it? Blood. Yeah. I was like, there's one more fluid that you could put on the little test strips and stick that in that little hole, and it would diagnose. Now, how is it diagnosing? That is a cartridge. You see the 2 affordances for finger to pull that out. There are cartridges. This is a concept. Cartridges for diagnosing those diseases that they could pull in and out. So it's a one-time use cartridge for, say, flu. And you could take out, if you tested yourself last week for flu, you want to test yourself again for flu. Seems kind of ridiculous, but you put the new cartridge in and you test. You give some saliva or blood, and you could test. So there's a little more simpler diagnosis than what that biomeme thing was doing, right, with the DNA.
Right. They all have different experiences.
Exactly, yep. And so that was my feedback, is like, okay, you have these, what seems to be a very comprehensive solution for different aspects, but how do you pull it all together to make it feel like this is a cohesive product? They're all talking together. They all are part of one mechanism that's going to help me self-diagnose.
What did they say?
He said, we're not there yet. They hadn't even built this yet, so they just had the.
When does this have to be done?
They right now are supposed to have May 1. They start testing with consumers, so they're supposed to have 30 units of their solution.
And you talked to them a year ago?
I talked to them in late September. I did not have that face on when I was talking to them. So what my feedback here was, that feels like a really tiny hole. And if I'm somebody that doesn't have the dexterity, the feeling in my hands, my tactile feedback is not good with my diabetes, or I'm elderly, those are very small holes, and then it looks like I can only use my 2 fingers. That's really hard. So let's make that center hole maybe something that's more conical, that if I miss the target, I get pushed into the hole. And then those finger holes for pulling in and out the cartridge, just widen them. Allow the user to use all 4 of their fingers to grab hold of it and work with the cartridges. Okay, so there was another piece to this, which was a smartphone app. So all of these pieces to their solution were going to be funneled into a smartphone app. So there's where we get sort of the, let's pull it all together, at least the data portion of it. You know, physically and visually, it looks like very desperate pieces to this solution, but that's where they were going with it. And it was it is a very valiant attempt to pull all of this complex stuff together and further along and much more broad than any of the other concepts I'd seen, as you could probably tell.
Like mechanism was probably their experience at Hopkins Hospital.
Right, yeah.
You got all these disparate vendors that
Yeah.
you're trying to make sense of.
Yeah, exactly. And they're just, I mean, I just was amazed at how it was just a different approach. I'd been seeing all these other approaches of, well, we've already got this device, let's pull from here and let's try something. And these guys were out there, what is already out there, and pull it all together. So I got some money on these guys, not really, but I really thought they were really good. And then this last company.
Software guy on their team, or these are all engineers?
I think they had pulled people from everywhere. Their team was huge. And I just talked to one of them, but you can go on the website and see how large their teams are.
Like 20 people it looked like.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. 20, 25, yeah. And the woman that headed up the Johns Hopkins, Tatiana, she was just sharp. And then Neil was, I mean, they were all just fabulous. Cloud DX out of Canada, another company that already had some solutions. This is their prototype for this solution, but they've already got software that does a lot of vitals monitoring. Vitality is 4 wireless devices connected to and managed by a mobile application. So what you see here is the main device that wraps around the back of the neck, a lot like the Arc. And it does the sensors with vital signs. There's 2 electrodes. These are electrodes here on the chest. And then there's a satellite, there's a unit in the earbud for infrared temperature, and then there's an earlobe clip for the PPG sensor to continue monitoring heart rate and probably blood pressure. And all of the data from these sensors are stored on a device, or stored in the device until the Bluetooth LE connection is established with the app. And that is, you can kind of start seeing it here. There's a mobile app here. This is a wrist cuff, on-demand wrist monitor that provides calibration for the blood pressure, and then also can do some of the temperature alongside the neck piece. And then they have the cloud diagnostic software on the phone. That's there. They already had that software, so I think they were modifying it to work within this solution. And then there's the IVDP, the in vitro diagnostics platform. That's what the iPhone is sitting in. And it's going to analyze, at the time was going to be ready to analyze 3 bodily fluids, the saliva, urine, and blood. And then software would determine whether the fluid sample needs to be analyzed and which fluid and test is required. So I imagine there's some sort of there's the test strip, right, and some sort of interaction that you can see the cuff behind the phone and some sort of interaction there to do the testing of the bodily fluids. They had this desktop app. This is their software that I think they were modifying for this use. It's a desktop version. Lots of data. So we move from the overviewed activities to charts and results. And then this is their responsive version of it on the mobile. Any questions about that? We got 10 minutes. Yes, sir.
Are you going to talk about the users?
Yes.
And who this is actually geared towards?
Yeah, definitely. Next, I conducted a UX boot camp. We covered a lot of things, but this to answer your question here. So this is the way they kind of categorized their spectrum of users. You've got your motivated, healthy, who are early technology adopters. In the center, you have your mainstream consumers. They're just information seeking. And then you have your chronically monitored or late adopters. This is how they were kind of putting their consumers on the spectrum. This is the XPRIZE, not the teams themselves, but the XPRIZE was saying, this is where you're looking for your consumers at this point when we start testing, this is where we're going to start pulling from. So at the time, they were still refining who they were actually going to target, but the thought was they would have to have used a phone, a mobile device to monitor fitness. They have to have been involved maybe with blog or participate in an online forum, or at least familiar with interacting online in a social way. They were pulling from, like I said, the University of California, San Diego. There was a database of 65,000 patients that they were going to start targeting with the different diseases that this could test for, and the degree to those the degree that those users had the disease, and figuring out where they should land with who they're going to recruit. They did need to be health savvy, being able to have your own device and own a computer and know how to download and that kind of thing. I might skip this section, but what I did is I had worn, I don't know if you're familiar with the Misfit Shine, it's a wearable. And I wanted them to see what my outlook on wearing something was like. So I had been wearing this for several months. So I kind of provided I took the criteria and gave feedback from my perspective of wearing that device and what I thought that the shortcomings were. And it was interesting because once I hit this point in the boot camp, everything stopped and they wanted to just hear my opinion on different devices and how they thought I might feel about it, which was very interesting because there's obviously a concern there. When I talked with the XPRIZE folks, they were really worried that they kept looking at people as patients and not consumers. And so we talked a lot about patients versus consumer and how that area on the spectrum that we were targeting is a set of people who are handling their disease and are tech savvy, and how does that growth look like? So let's say we get those people, but then those guys aren't the ones costing a lot of the money and that need to be monitored, right? So we just ended up having this huge discussion around my perspective, and I kept telling them, like, this is one data point. Don't take it from somebody who's healthy without a chronic disease, but this is what I look for and I do this for a living, right? So it's a little bit skewed. Did I answer your question about who they're targeting?
You did.
Okay. So this is the timeline, and one of my last slides. So we've got a few minutes for questions. But this August 2014, the summit was late September is when I went out there and helped them, did the one-on-ones and then did the boot camp. And that was really the extent of my involvement. Now, I was, in working with them, and then the work order that we drew up with them is that, now that they know what they know, what were we not able to address, and let's follow up with some webinars, after the new year kind of thing, once they kind of got more into their solutions. But that has never come to be. I would have loved to have done that. But where they are right now is they're in this consumer testing period, about to launch all of that. And so that's about all I have.
Do you know how many are actually going to launch the consumer testing?
I think I don't know that for sure. I have reached out a couple times to my contact there, and I haven't heard anything back. So I don't know if all 10 have, to your point, they could have dropped out at some point and just been like, okay, this is a lot of money, we've reached our limit, and we're no longer here. So, but those last two teams, the Cloud DX and the Johns Hopkins team, was really, I think they were, in my opinion, the front runners there. Yes?
Well, assuming, is there a criteria at which no one will win? They don't meet certain baseline? Okay.
That's right, yep. No one could win. They also, it was interesting, they said, when we hand over the prize money, we're done. We don't then monitor that they're spending the prize money on on the right thing.
So I noticed one of the criteria was actions.
Okay.
But I didn't see that any of the products really scaffolded the people into taking action based on the results that they're receiving from the monitoring devices. Is that true, or is that just something that I missed? Or was it?
I wanted to look at that criteria a little bit closer. To your point, I think at the point where I was looking at their prototypes, this is probably not there yet. Now, when I did my assessment, that was one of the things I dinged the Misfit Shine on. And granted, the Misfit Shine is it's your Fitbit. In fact, it's even more, to me, I was looking at the Fitbit mobile application. It had so much more wealth of information than the Misfit Shine did. I was disappointed in the Misfit Shine. Using the device made me change my views about health and wellness. Well, I already have views. There was nothing to change. I'm very active. I exercise. I exercise so I can eat whatever I want. So I don't know that I eat very healthy, but you know, I don't want to change. So it was information that was interesting to me because when I work out, I wanted to see how hard I worked out. Although there were times where I was like, man, why is it? And what that is it's a dial. Let me show you the picture. Oh. Am I going the right way? So you can see the LED lights. And you can double tap, and it will light up the LED lights based on the amount of activity for the day. So that's the readout there, but I can go into my phone and see it track, the phone application, see it track. And sometimes I was like, I killed myself this morning. Why has this only got 7 things lit up? So I always questioned its accuracy. It also provided sleep data. So that's around, from what I can gather, that's around how much movement I do while I sleep. Well, it would say you got, out of 6 hours, which is my goal, you got 4 hours of deep, restful sleep. Okay, well, is that good? I mean, is that the same for everyone too? So I could go in and benchmark myself against other women my age, but it never said that I was, you know, I never knew whether but for me, is this sleep pattern okay? I mean, I can tell I feel rested today or I don't feel rested, but I didn't know how to quantify or kind of qualify that information to me. So it was very limited. And then, so I wore it from, I wore it all summer, and about Thanksgiving time, the battery died. It uses a big button battery. And at that point, I just took it off. And what was weird is that I would get this little note on my phone that said, you haven't synced your Shine in a while. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I don't have a battery. And then, like, after I got 2 of those notices, I got an email from Shine saying, would you like for us to send you some batteries? I was like, ooh, that's kind of creepy, but yes. So then they took a month to send me a battery. And so I put the battery back in, I wore it a little bit more, and then I decided I'm not going to wear it anymore. So that's not good either. So yeah. But it's beautiful. It is a beautiful piece of jewelry. Yes?
Can you speak to the cognitive burden the devices you looked at place on a user? Like, you were saying that this even was a lot of conscious effort to know whether or not it was good, and then the battery died, and that was enough of a hurdle for you not to use it.
Right, exactly.
So if you've got something that's even more stuff, like the devices you were looking at, can you talk about that?
Yeah, I can. And there's a lot of things flying through my head because I think a lot, I'm going to generalize here. When people are diagnosed, there's that denial. No, there's not something really wrong with me. So first you have to overcome that with someone, right? And I want to say that that's a lot of the issue we have as human beings, is that when we hear we take our health for granted, right? It's not until something goes wrong that we pay attention. And so it's hard to to kind of come face to face with the fact that my body's not doing what it's supposed to be, but it's always done for my entire life. Now I have to do something to help it do that. So there's overcoming that. one of the criticisms that I heard from about 2 teams of this prize, this competition, was that it is a lot to cover. And they talked about how this is, the prize is designed that you can someday walk into Walmart or Best Buy and buy something like this. Well, how many people are really going into Best Buy to get a machine that diagnoses HIV? What's the reality of that? And then how isn't that a one-time use? Like if I go in and I diagnose myself, I want to see if I have HIV. I buy this. Who knows what they might cost, right? And I guess how often would you test for HIV, or how often would I test for diabetes? Why would I suspect that I have diabetes? You know, so I think there's a little bit of a flaw there, and like, I can understand having blood pressure. I need to monitor my blood pressure. That's easy enough to do. But these kind of harder, more in-depth diagnoses of diseases that are potentially life-threatening and life-changing, I don't know how much of you do that at home, really. So I think there is a large barrier to adoption in some cases. But I should say the India team was like, this is going to be sold in doctors' offices. This will be sold to patients in doctors' offices. Or this will be sold to patients in the hospital. This is something home monitoring. Or if you're, just using the case of HIV, if you're somebody who does not have a steady partner, you may be repeat testing every month or whatever is recommended. But I think, you know, to your point, it is a potentially huge issue.
Kaiser and others would describe the early adopters of this from the diagnostic point of view, not monitoring, is worried as well.
Right.
Something about your history of a parent who might have died early of congestive heart failure, whatever.
Right.
That's constantly on your mind, so you're driven to try to.
Yes, the motivation level, the fear motivation, sort of, right?
But after that, it becomes very vague in terms of how that translates to this kind of part of the market. Other than people who've already been diagnosed, and who relies on one piece of the market that's relevant to whatever it is.
Agreed, yeah. And I think that's another area of healthcare we're on the cusp of, is how much can we do from home, and then what do we do with that information after we have it? I can go to my doctor and say, hey, I bought this thing and it said I have this. And do you believe it? Should I believe it? What do we got to do? There's that, making that seamless, moving from the home. If we're going to de-skill medicine so that I can do things in the home, how do we then make it seamless into my PCP or my specialist that I'm seeing? Hey.
You mentioned being excited that it was a consumer-facing prize. What's the difference for development for consumers versus patients?
I think for consumers you have to go much more broad, and there may be kind of a progressive disclosure if you're going for a more broad audience of, okay, so this is what we've learned about you. Here's what you need to do next. It's sort of an educational piece. For your motivated patient, I think they have knowledge and they are seeking, okay, now that I have this knowledge of my disease, how do I fix it and how do I help? So it's a much more maybe acute, honed in target of information and action. It's probably more, more targeted so that the patient go, okay, here's what I can do, empowering the patient. I'm gonna try and fix this myself, versus somebody who's more, so let me see, how healthy am I, or what should I be doing better? You know, I'm getting to be older and I need to be fixing some stuff here. Did that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.